Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have Jessica Wheeler with us. Jessica is currently the VP Global Head of TA Strategy at Take-Two Interactive. And Jessica, help remind me. So that includes 2K and which other firm?
Zynga.
Zynga. That's right. Okay, cool. Well, Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, where did you grow up?
I grew up in a town called Vancouver, Washington. So it's just north of Portland, Oregon, and south by about 2.5 hours of Tacoma, Washington, or Seattle, Washington, which is about 4 hours away.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's it like there?
Well, it's the Pacific Northwest. So it has four seasons that are very distinct, but small town, most of the people that, are born and raised there, they know everybody. I mean, it's not like 1,000 people, but it's also not like where I'm at now, which is Los Angeles. So very, very different. And I would say, when I go back, I almost always run into somebody that I know. And my family is there, and so they can't go someplace without knowing somebody. So, but it's
Yeah.
a great, I mean, it's a great little town for sure.
How often do you go back?
Um, I go back actually. I go to Portland more than I go to Vancouver because the majority of like my friend group is in Portland. My family's in Vancouver, but I say I go back a few times a year. I am a big fan of the Oregon Ducks. My daughter goes to university there, and so my husband and I have season tickets. So we go up to Eugene, which is not much smaller than Vancouver, to put it into perspective. We go up quite a bit because we like to watch football. But other than that, I say to go back and visit family. It's, maybe a couple times a year.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah.
What were you like as a kid?
Um, I think I was very social. I was very active in my school. I was active in my community. I come from a family of there's four of us kids, and I was the youngest, and I'm significantly younger. So oftentimes I feel like I was an only child. And as a result of that, I had a lot of friends and, wanted to do all the things. And so I competed in sports, and I feel like I led a really normal, very great, fortunate childhood.
It's awesome. So, how much older were your siblings?
10 years.
10? Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And then on up.
On up.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so what was the biggest spread?
14.
14? Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a sister who's like 13 years older than me.
Yeah.
A brother who's
Yeah.
9. So,
Yeah, it's really great. Like as you become adults, it changes, like the dynamics between you change. And so I think it's a little bit it doesn't feel as drastic or as big, but obviously as a kid, it's like my sister was getting married when I was in elementary school. So it's like that's a big age gap.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's huge. Yeah, I had like for me, it was like the whole modern family situation. I had like half siblings and step siblings.
Hmm.
So we were all 3 years apart. And so I was the youngest of five in that situation. But I hardly lived with any of them, like, because they
Yeah.
were, you know what I mean. So it's kind of like I had this weird experience too, where I felt sort of like on my with my mom, I actually was a single child, like I was her only kid. But
Oh,
then,
okay.
two of them were from my dad's uh first marriage, which are my half siblings,
Yeah.
and then two step siblings from his third. I was in the middle, from the middle marriage.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
weird. It's kind of weird. It's like you have siblings, but you sort of feel like a single child too, or only child,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Are you guys
We share
close
that.
now?
Are we like with my siblings?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I don't know about your family. Mine's like so spread out. Like my sister's actually in Irvine. She's a professor at University of California, Irvine. Everybody's kind of off doing their own thing. And like my step siblings, like we didn't really like live together. We're like we keep in
Yeah.
touch, but no, I wouldn't say we're like that close, I guess.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
See them at Christmas.
Yeah. The traditionals.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I get that. I think then that I'm closer to mine than you are to yours. So
Probably. Yeah, you guys are close. Cool.
yeah, we
Um,
are now.
That's awesome. When you ended up going to college, you moved to the East Coast, right?
Yeah, I
Where'd you go? Or
did.
where did you like end up moving? Where?
Yeah, so I was in New York, and I think that, looking at the difference between the city and Vancouver is very, very, very different. There was probably Brooklyn is probably bigger than Vancouver, actually. So it was a transition, but I think fortunately my mom was at a phase in her life where she, I think, was, obviously sad to see me go, but she was newly married, and I think she kind of knew that like this was the path that I wanted to take. I wanted to get out of Vancouver. And so she was really supportive of it. But, I now as a parent, I can only imagine like how that must have felt for my mom, because my daughter is, only a handful of hundreds of miles away. And I feel like she's, in another country sometimes just because you don't see them every day. But I'm sure that she really felt like I was in another country.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's wild. It's wild when you start to have like this similar experiences to your parents.
100%. Yep. Yep.
Things start to fall into place a lot more. We start to, really understand,
Yeah. I think
probably
you have
have a lot more
a level
empathy.
of appreciation.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
appreciation,
yeah.
empathy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it all
Yeah.
seems so simple when you're like, starting out as a teenager, young adult, right? It's like, like why would X, Y, Z happen to this, that, and the other, man?
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Exactly. I've had quite a few of those moments as of late, and I'm like, oh, this is how she felt.
Ah,
Okay, I can
yeah.
appreciate this
Ah,
now.
I get it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You initially started out in different, you didn't start out in recruiting, right?
Mm-mm.
Started
Yeah.
out
And
in a
I,
totally
I
different
don't,
industry, right?
yeah, and I don't know many people who actually do, right? Like I don't know that I've ever met somebody who has said that this was going to be their job out of college or out of, high school, because obviously not everyone goes to college, but or just in general, right? Like I don't know that people raise their hand and say this is the path that I'm going to take. Maybe there's a few that do, but I think most that I know of kind of fall into it. And so yeah, that was my story. But no, I worked at a record label, and I worked in sales, and I didn't really care that much for either of them. While they were entertaining from time to time, I think sales was probably the closest to recruiting, just because as you become a recruiter, in a sense, you have to sell your candidates, you have to sell the company. And if you work at an agency, which is where I got my start, you have a lot of metrics that you have to hit. So it's very similar to sales. But I knew that like my calling definitely was not working at the label or working as a inside sales manager or in sales in general. I worked at Nordstrom was my first job, and I was in sales at Nordstrom. And I just remember thinking to myself like that it was the greatest thing, but that was largely because I was getting a discount on clothes. And
Yeah,
not because I was really good at it, but
nice.
because, the little bit of commission that I did make, I was able to get some really great jeans for a highly discounted price. And so I think that at that point in time, I thought that that might be my path, but that was also short-lived.
Nice.
Yeah.
What were you doing for the record label?
I was in A&R. So you got to deal with a lot of the artists, whether they were up and coming or, otherwise.
What's
And
A&R?
it's like it's basically where you manage all of like their day-to-day artist responsibility is what it is.
Wow.
But manage like their day-to-day stuff. And it was no, it wasn't like there was like these big names or anything like that, but highly entitled, have all of these expectations. So it's, essentially like kind of babysitting the day-to-day.
That sounds like it would probably be a pretty intense job. Lots of hours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and odd ones at that. But I think tough, no. You really have to like that industry and want to really grow in that industry, because you just deal with shit, like all the things that like you just, I mean, it's babysitting essentially. It's like being an assistant to somebody who's never had an assistant, so they don't know how to appreciate like what an assistant really does and what an assistant really means. And so, imagine that with people who this is like the first time that they've maybe come into any sort of money. And in their mind, it could be $10,000 that feels like a lot or, whatever. So I think that like it's not, I think it's over glamorized in, the world than what it actually is when you're in the job.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. So were you already in LA by the time you had that job, or was that in New York?
That was New York
Okay.
and then LA. Yeah.
When did you end up moving to LA?
The first time it was probably in like 1990 or 20 or 2001 actually. And then I moved back to Portland, Oregon because I had met my husband who was I obviously he wasn't my husband at the time, but I had met him and so I moved back to Portland because that's where he was from.
Hmm. Cool. And then you both moved back to LA. Is
LA,
that for
yeah.
work or just because
Yeah, it was for work, yeah.
yeah?
So I moved, it was 2015.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, so was that for Hulu?
Yeah, yeah. So at the time I was working for a company that was senior housing. It was owned by a private equity firm. And that private equity firm, they were really like difficult to work for. And so I was very actively looking for something different. And Hulu had reached out. So
Nice. Well, that was probably what, like I'm assuming for Hulu, I can't, was that like a really high growth time for them back in two?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was so when I joined the organization, it was like, I want to say like 500 people. And then we scaled it to roughly 3,000. They
500 to
hadn't,
3,000. Wow.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, granted, that scale was done, roughly within like a 3.5 year time period. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. Hulu was a great organization too. I mean, the culture there was like really, really cool. And coming from the culture that I had been in, which was, again, it was the private equity firm that I think was, running the organization like a private equity firm. And that's not speaking poorly of private equity firms, but I do think that like a lot of them have a reputation of, I mean, like they really are trying to be mindful of their spend, right? And so we had to do a lot with nothing.
Yeah.
And, they expected you to work insanely long hours. And so you go from that to being at Hulu, which was a culture of like, embracing your individuality and like coming to work as your true authentic self. And they really appreciated the employees and like the work that they did and they had so much fun while they were doing it. It was very, very, very different going from, like I think I may have told you this, but I had a manager, my CHRO at the time. He threw a bagel at me because he was upset with me at the way that I was doing something. So going from that to, an environment where you are fully embraced
That
for,
that's
meeting.
the
Yeah.
craziest story that a leader, you said it was a
Yeah.
CHRO?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Somebody leading HR?
Yeah. Yeah, it was
What in the
really,
world?
yeah,
What are they
yeah.
doing today? I wonder what that's like.
Retired.
What happened to this person? Jeez, that is insane. I've never heard of anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, it happened. And it was interesting because there was a whole group of people, including my team, that was around and saw the
They
whole thing
saw it.
happen. And our head of legal and our head of ER had reached out to me and they were like, listen, we're going to have him go to anger management classes and he's going to apologize to you in like this, public format, whatever, whatever. And it was like, I didn't want him to apologize to me in a public format. That was really uncomfortable. I appreciate the fact that he's going to anger management, but at the end of the day, like he did what he did, And so I think that there was a lot of concern that I was going to file a claim. And I actually didn't file a claim. And from time to time, I've thought, I wonder if I should have, but I didn't because that just isn't who I am or who I was at the time. And so I took the letter of apology and I, ended up looking for another job. And my LinkedIn rep actually at Hulu, she was the one that reached out to me because she knew what happened. And she was like, hey, listen, Hulu's looking for a leader. Would you be interested? And Hulu was in Southern California and I was in Portland, Oregon. So I knew it would require relocation.
Did they end up firing this guy?
No, they
How do you
didn't.
not fire somebody if they throw a bagel at somebody's head?
Yeah, I'm not, I don't know, to be really honest. It was one of those, I think looking back now, I'm like, now that I know what I know, because,
Right.
that was fairly early on in my career. It was at a time where I was still like building my confidence as a leader and building my confidence as a person.
Yeah.
And so I think that there was, I didn't feel comfortable in pushing the issue. And so now that I know what I know, I do wonder, like, how did it happen that way? How did and he was with the organization for many, many years after. Um, and it wasn't the first and it wasn't the last. And so I do wonder, like how that happened. And I still don't know. But yeah, he was there for many years.
That is insane. That is insane. Well, I'm glad you landed at Hulu. It sounds like it was a much healthier
Me
work-life
too.
environment
Me too.
than
Me
work.
too.
Well, so at Hulu, I mean, you oversaw, was it basically most of the TA motion for the US market, right? Like you had a pretty big team working for you, right?
It was a decent sized team by the time that I departed there. But when I first got there, it was like, I want to say it was like five, six people, something like that. It was fairly small. And then I think because we were in, such a high growth mode, and fortunately I was able to put, kind of a business case together to help our leadership recognized that we needed to invest in, more resources. And so ended up building the team out to, in the end, I think it was 22. And then they scaled back a little bit as we got to, kind of a more stable place in terms of, the actual growth of the organization. But I would say that, it was a fun team. It was a really, really, really strong team, actually for the brand not being what it is today, but for what it was back then. Because, this was 10, I don't know, 10, 11 years ago.
Sure.
They really didn't have the brand. They were still like, they were just getting to that place of where their brand was very highly,
Mm.
highly recognized and very sought after. Obviously, we ended up scaling back a little bit once we kind of stabilized. But I think that at the end of the day, I was really fortunate to have the team that I did because the brand wasn't as strong as it was as what it is today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty cool experience. And so then you went to Activision and you were overseeing the talent acquisition for Call of Duty. Is that right?
Yeah, when I joined there, I joined just Call of Duty or just Activision. And there was a desire to build out a COE for TA. And
COE is a Center of Excellence.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a desire to really transform the entire HR organization. And as part of that, it was to build out a COE for talent acquisition. And so I moved from Activision to Activision Blizzard, which is the parent company.
Mm.
And I had Activision, Blizzard, and King within my remit. And so we scaled the organization. I mean, for those that know, Activision or know Blizzard and even King for that matter, they operate very separately. But I think within the different labels, they are, they're very, they do have centralized function. And so this was one of the first times where there was actually a COE that sat outside of just Activision or just Blizzard or just King. And so there was some change management that went into that. And there was, a lot of conversations and there were a lot of learnings. But I think that, ultimately the way that the model was structured, it worked until it didn't. And so then we moved back to a label model. And that's when I went and led for just Call of Duty.
What was the culture like there? I'm just kind of curious, Call of Duty.
Here's the thing. I I think that that was an organization that I learned more in my career than I've ever learned because they're able to pull in some of the smartest people that I've ever met. And I think it's because they do have such a big, strong brand. That said, we all had to stick together, and we had to have each other's backs because a lot of the senior leadership there and the executive leadership, the stories that you have heard, the articles that you have read, the press releases that have come out, that's very accurate. And so it was a difficult time to be there because there was a lot of negative press that was coming out just from previous years and from previous times. And so I think it was challenging because being in TA, you're the first line of defense for anything and, that first point of contact. And so we had a lot of people who had seen the press and who had seen some of the negative articles. And so my team was tasked with trying to continue to build the culture and to try to continue to, build like positive reinforcement within the industry as well as, within like just our candidate experience. And it was really tough because we actually had to stop recruiting. And we actually took jobs down because we needed to have a break from, just all the questions. And so what people have read or what people have seen, a lot of it is very true. But I think that when I joined in 2019, a lot of what came out happened in 2019, 2020, 2021. There were noticeable changes, I think, thanks to some of the lawsuits. I think that my team kind of leaned into that and was cautiously optimistic that things were actually on the turnaround. And I would agree that like they were on the turnaround for sure. And then obviously the Microsoft transaction happened. And so, basically everything halted and stopped at that point in time from, the press and like the lawsuits and just, some of the leadership behaviors. A lot of the leadership behaviors had actually stopped before I got there, but things had just been brewing and then they came to light,
Yeah.
after I joined.
When a company's going through like a transition, when things like that happen, and I actually wasn't as f familiar even when I asked you the question. I just like looked some stuff up on Google and some of the issues that seem to have happened regarding harassment and whatnot. When a company's going through a transition, right, bouncing back from that, I'm curious, like, how do you approach that? Like when you're I mean, I suppose when you're recruiting and hiring, right, it's talking with candidates about how those things have been addressed and what changes are occurring. My assumption is that you had to have a strategy there to
Yeah.
make sure you're
Yeah, we
attracting
did.
smart people.
We Yeah, we did. I mean, I think that that was one of the reasons why we actually had to press pause on any sort of, recruiting and recruiting marketing efforts because we did need to create a strategy. And I actually brought my team together because we needed to just have an opportunity to have like very honest conversations with each other. And I needed to allow a safe space for my team to just kind of vent and ask questions. There's obviously a lot of things that, because none of us were in the room at the time, we don't necessarily know what is true and what isn't true. And I think
Yeah.
that, they did the best job that they could in terms of like addressing it with the broader organization and helping the organization understand like what changes they were making. One of the things that I really tried to do was provide as much visibility to my team from that messaging as I possibly could. And I think that that's the way that you have to approach it, right? You have to be honest. Like, listen, there is some, exaggerations in some of the statements that were made and in some of the articles. But at the end of the day, stuff happened that shouldn't have happened in that environment. And so I think that, we needed to be honest and own up to it. And we just needed to also acknowledge the fact that there's, three sides to every story. And so I think that by me allowing my team that safe space to just vent and ask the questions, that helped. And it really allowed for them to kind of get some of those frustrations out. And then I'm very much like, what happens, happens. Let's learn from it and move forward. And so that was kind of the same approach that I took in that situation. And I think that they appreciated that. And then again, we partnered with our comms team and with our PR team to just kind of create some sort of talking points that helped them at least feel like they were armed with ways that they could answer the questions. But the first answer always was, yeah, you know, I wasn't here, but I've heard the same things that you have. And, me especially as like a woman leader, I never experienced any of that. So I could genuinely say, like, I didn't ever experience that. And I've been here for, 3 years or whatever it was at the time. And I think that that helped. And so finding people that would be advocates like that was, another way that my team was able to like lean in and, kind of deal and answer some of those questions.
So what you're referring to is basically when you have independent cultures, like not only combining the systems and the teams, but how to incorporate and essentially integrate the cultures together.
Yeah,
Is that
so
what you
like if
mean? Or
yeah, yes, yes, for the most part, I think. I mean, being in environments or being in a culture where, it's very challenging, either because it's very intense and you work with maybe the people that you work with can be very intense and can be I don't want to say toxic because I think that I mean I've definitely been in those environments, but I would say that very high expectations, very high demands, and very, very challenging in terms of like the way that they treat, talk, and push back. So you have that environment, and then you have the environment where, everyone has an opinion, everyone has a voice, they want everyone to be heard. I don't know that one of them is better or harder or worse than the other, but I'm in a place now where I am actually bringing all of those experiences and bringing all of those together. So in gaming specifically, because there's a lot that's riding on a specific date, and this would be the case in, film or in media and entertainment in general, because you've got these, deadlines of like you have to have a trailer ready to go by this date, or you have to have milestones in building games. So there's a lot of pressure, and there can be some really difficult, hard conversations. And then you've got, a world where maybe those deadlines aren't as hard or as strict. Bringing those two teams together, that is hard because you've got one sort of group that's like, hey, we're all friends, like, yeah, we don't have to worry about that. Like, that metric doesn't really matter. And then you've got another group of people that are like, bullshit, it doesn't matter. Like, we've got $100,000 on the line here, or in some cases, $1 million on the line, right? We have to meet that. And so, trying to help both of them see each side, that's a lot of work. That's really hard. But the more that they interact, the better that they get to know each other, and I see it directly within my team, they've actually created a really great working relationship, and they have really found a way to have balance between the two and lean into each other because one's on the game team, and they know that like this is the deadline for this person to make this hire, to have this data set or this point out to the business within a certain time. And so they've actually started acting as a resource for that person because maybe they don't have as challenging of deadlines, or their metrics maybe aren't as strict or as tough. But
Hmm.
if I hadn't been in that environment, or for either at Activision or at Hulu, where I've seen like very much both sides, I don't know that I would actually be able to blend the two together today.
Is one of the, I'm just curious, like in terms of tactical ways of doing this, do you get the different teams together to essentially collaborate? Like, okay, if we need to find a uniform way to do X, Y, and Z, everybody meet up, chip in, figure out a solution. Like, do you give them like bring them together and then give them autonomy to problem solve? Is that's sort of where
Yeah.
my head goes in terms of trying to
Yeah.
combine the
Yeah.
cultures.
Yeah. I would say yes, I do that. Where it starts for me though is me and my leaders, right? Like I have to be able to, and we didn't talk about this, but one of the like most critical things for me as a leader is understanding my business and understanding the business needs. And the only way that I'm going to be able to do that is by being in the business. And I give my leadership team the autonomy to do the same thing because anything that they learn from the business, they can take back and they can provide that context to their teams. And that's how they're going to be able to really understand the dynamics of said team or of, said launch or whatnot. I'm sitting in on a go-to-market strategy on Tuesday for NBA. And that is so critical to me because we also do the workforce plan. So we need to better understand like the sensitivities and where they sit within that go-to-market strategy and the people, and the go-to-market strategy and the people that pertain to that go-to-market strategy. But if I didn't have the relationships with the business, I wouldn't be invited and I wouldn't be included. And therefore, I would be that much further behind in helping to set them up and their teams up for success.
That's a heavy lift. It's definitely a very heavy lift, but that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Yep. And
Cool.
I think anybody who does lead teams, especially like, teams that are building something like what we are doing at Take Two, you really have to understand the inner workings. And I know that there's some leaders that are not supportive of their teams sitting with the business. And in my mind, and I can see both sides of it, but if they're going to sit there, that's how they're going to learn. And so that's the view that I have kind of taken is sit with the business and understand what they do so that they can take that back to like their day to day. A lot of times, I mean, we've got people on my team who will go to our mocap studio and just sit and watch and ask questions because that just makes them better at what they do.
Sure.
And so giving that autonomy and that trust to do that, plus it's also good development for them too, right? It's not like there's like this huge path in a function that right now is in many companies is not growing. And so they have to find other ways to develop, and other ways to develop can sometimes be horizontal, not just vertical.
I love that. I actually so I own two companies. One of them is Secure Vision. I started almost 11 years ago. And that's an embedded recruiting and RPO firm. So we embed recruiters as if they were essentially internal recruiters, delivery leads, so on and so forth. And then a little over a year ago, I started another software company called June, which does AI screening and interviewing. And what's really interesting is that they're totally separate companies, but June is piggybacking off Secure Vision's go-to-market engine. And so we do have a shared customer base, and we're actually going to be rebranding my services firm to highlight our AI capabilities that we bring to the table with June, essentially, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the further I'm getting with June, it's like the more, to some extent, it's like they're separate companies, but the cultures are kind of merging. Like we have, of course, like developers, and we're at a totally different growth stage with June than where we are with Secure Vision. That's, a larger organization that's worked with hundreds of companies, so on and so forth. But yeah, I'm giving growth opportunities like horizontally, as you said. So we have one person on our go-to-market team who's sort of go-to-market ops who is really interested in potentially going more of like a product path. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, well, hey, why don't you just join the weekly sprints, like stand-ups, like where they're planning, and you could start to hear our CTO talking with the engineers about tickets and product roadmap and these types of things. And then he's sitting with me on the product strategy side, and so it's just like that's a very easy thing for me to be able to do. It's an hour a week for him. It doesn't mess with his productivity. And I know one way or another, like that's going to ultimately benefit the businesses. Like he's going to be able to find a way to add strategic value and problem
Yeah.
solve and do it in a way that's different than the engineers would, he'll think about things that we haven't. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
100%,
So
100%. One of the things that I have found to be largely beneficial is, and this has happened to me at a few different companies, but where you have somebody who has actually been in said role before, right? So we have somebody on the team who used to be a game designer, and as much as they loved it, they also really loved like the people aspect of it, but didn't necessarily want to manage people per se. They now are a recruiter on the team, but they recruit, designers. And so they can actually have like a very good, deep conversation about their skills. Now, not everybody is in that position, but I think, similar to what you're doing. by giving them the opportunity to just like join some of these calls or some of these, in your case, stand-ups, that what they can take from that and then bring back, that's irreplaceable. And that's, again, that's developing a skill in them that they're not necessarily going to get in just their day to day. But also, in a world where the TA functions are quickly dissolving because people are going different routes or they're scaling back, this gives people a kind of a way to feel like they are able to grow and to develop when they're maybe not necessarily getting promoted.
So in your current role right now at Take-Two Interactive, there are, as far as my understandings, it's a parent company, right? And you
Hmm.
have three different labels funneling up to you, and there is in this year you're looking at combining the essentially the operations of the three labels into one center of excellence for talent acquisition, as I believe you put it. Did I say that properly?
Yeah, yeah, that's so
Okay.
that work has already been done.
Okay.
That work started last year of bringing the labels together. And so now we are one team. We are a centralized team or a COE, and we've been operating that way for a year. And so anybody who's done that work knows that it's a lot. It's not as easy maybe as one might think in just, bringing three teams together because you've got three different cultures, you've got three different ways of working, you've got, in some cases, three different ATSs, you've got different tools, you've got three different budgets, you've got different leadership and the way that they manage, the way that they, performance manage. So it's not just as easy as bringing three teams together.
What's like the process there in terms of what's the first thing you do, order of operations?
I wish that there was just a first thing. Um, but the
Right.
first thing that I did in this case, I brought my leadership team together because I needed to see how they interacted with one another, right? When I think about the labels like the 2K and Zynga, those are game studios. They are all over the world. They operate very independent from each other and they make video games. And so the way that their culture is very different than if you are at Take-Two and they hire for corporate functions. They very much have more of a corporate mentality in the way that, their day to day is, and just like the way that they think about processes and the way that they think about budgets and people. And so for me, it was most important that my leadership team worked well together and they were able to understand and at least respect the way that each other worked. And so I started having leadership team meetings before we were even really operating as a COE. So they were still very much three separate labels, but they at least, were able to start having conversations around the way that their like label or their studio or, their teams operated and to see the dynamics between the leaders. That was where I was then able to see where did we have gaps just within my own leadership team and how did I fill those gaps or how did I build a bridge between those gaps. I kind of expanded out from there to understand then how did their teams work with other teams. And so I started having somebody that would sit within the Zynga label work on a similar role that they'd worked on for Zynga for 2K. And so I slowly started to like, bring the teams in to start interacting with each other too, once the leadership team was solid.
So within this transformation, what are you currently working on?
It's more operations function focused now. There's a lot of really great things that have come out of each of the labels, and it's figuring out how do we take those great things and harmonize them across the other two labels or our ways of working for one label or for a studio that we can implement at the others. And so right now we've got three ATSs. They're not different, they're all the same, but they are different tenants. And so now I have to bring those together to one tenant. And that's, as you can imagine, a lot of change management.
Which ATS is it?
We use Greenhouse.
Greenhouse?
Yeah. And so all three labels use Greenhouse, but because we have three separate tenants, we have a recruiter if they're supporting the three labels or maybe two. they have to log out and then log in to a new tenant. And so now my goal is really to move to one tenant with just different permissions.
Sure.
So that's a big focus. And then just thinking about processes and tools across the three labels and how can we harmonize to one agreement with one tool? How can we harmonize to one process? Obviously, geographic restrictions in some cases, but really, how can we start focusing on making sure that everything is done the same way, at least as a baseline?
Mm.
And then if we, need to pivot depending on where we're at regionally or, geographically, then we can do that. But that's my main focus for this year is getting operations to be smooth and working as well as, on the recruiting side.
One of the top takeaways that you had shared with me as a talent acquisition leader is that you need to make sure you have strong leaders underneath you.
Hmm.
Can you tell us more about how you think about that and how you ensure that you do?
I think I've been really, really, really fortunate to have had some really great people on my team from, previous companies. And so I have brought some of those folks over and there was instant trust there. And for me, that has allowed me to develop the others that maybe are not at the level that I would like for them to be yet.
Mm.
The reason why I think it's important that you have strong leaders underneath you is because as a head of or as a global leader, you need to be able to interact with the business and have, strategic business conversations with them. And in order to do that, you need to know that all of the shit underneath is not going to fall apart. I use the analogy of a duck, right? Like a duck's legs are moving so feverishly under the water, but they just look so smooth as they're going across the water, right? And so sometimes I think that's okay, but other times I want to know that like it's just as smooth underwater as it is on top. And so for me, like if I don't have that leadership team under me or that leadership team like within my group, then I'm going to constantly be that, that duck who's swimming feverishly and I'm going to have to go underwater and then come above water. That's not scalable, not at least at the scale in which we operate. So for me, having that strong team that I know I can count on is really, really important. Like I said, I've been really fortunate to have a few of those folks on my team throughout the years that I fully trust. And I've either brought them with me or they were already there. And I could tell right away because they've got high capacity and they are really strong with their metrics and they manage their team very closely, but yet they are very autonomous. So I think there's just different ways that I gauge someone's success as a people manager. And I do skip levels too. And so for me, I get a lot out of those skip level conversations.
Love it. So I want to talk a little bit about the future and learn more about if you would be open to sharing who you're striving to become. When you think about the next several years of your life, what comes top of mind?
I think my long-term goal is really to, be a chief talent officer. And so I've been actually spending a lot more time on succession planning and talent management and talent development because that's ultimately like my long-term goal. And I think that I need to have a successor in order to do that. I'm really focusing on developing my team, and there's a couple of individuals who I think could actually be my successor so that then I can take on something more because I'm not in a place where I can take on something more right now because I don't have somebody who can step into my role. But that's like what my ultimate long-term goal is. And I say long-term meaning within the next, probably 5 years. And however I need to get there, I think the first place to start is really just with developing my current leadership team.
I love it. Well, Jessica, look, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming on the show today, sharing your experience, uh, leading the charge at so many different great companies, and sharing everything you've learned along the way. So, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And for everybody tuning in, we'll see you next time.